My name is Isabella Cross, and I am 32 years old. If someone had told me a few years ago that the people I trusted most, the very parents who raised me, would one day turn their backs on me in my darkest hour, I would have laughed at the absurdity. But betrayal rarely announces itself politely, it erupts when grief has already hollowed you out. I grew up in a strict household, the only daughter sandwiched between two sons. Michael, the golden child, and Sophia, the fragile princess. From the beginning, my parents made it clear where their affections lay. My brothers could do no wrong, my sister's whims were indulged endlessly. But me, I was expected to be resilient, the problem solver, the one who needed nothing. Perhaps that's why, when tragedy struck, I naively thought they would finally rally around me. I thought blood meant loyalty. I was wrong. 3 years ago, my life was shattered beyond recognition. My sweet little boy, Ethan, only 6 years old, fell gravely ill. Leukemia, an ugly word that became the constant echo in my head. We fought like soldiers in a war we never signed up for. Endless hospital visits. Cruel rounds of chemotherapy. Nights where sleep never came. Because I had to watch his chest rise and fall. Terrified that one day it wouldn't. Ethan was more than a child to me. He was the reason I breathed. His laughter was sunlight in human form, piercing even the darkest of days. But despite every effort, every prayer, every desperate wish whispered into the night, the inevitable came. On a gray morning in February, as the world outside carried on obliviously, Ethan took his last breath in my arms. I don't remember much about the hours that followed. Pain has a way of warping time, turning seconds into eternities. What I do remember is making the hardest phone call of my life. To my parents. My hands trembled so violently I could barely hold the phone. I told them their grandson was gone, that we would hold the funeral on Saturday. My voice broke into pieces as I asked, pleaded, for their support. Their response: cold silence, followed by excuses. My father muttered something about not being able to handle it emotionally, while my mother bluntly said, "Funerals are for closure, and we don't believe in dwelling on the dead. We'll pray from home." I was stunned. I thought grief had already drained me of every possible wound, but their absence cut deeper than death itself. On the day I laid my son to rest, I stood alone. No mother to hold me. No father's hand on my shoulder. My parents chose absence over love. They erased Ethan from their lives as though he were nothing more than an inconvenient shadow. And yet, the worst betrayal was still to come. Months later, when the ache of Ethan's absence had become a dull but constant companion, they returned. This time with demands that would ignite a fury inside me I never knew I possessed. But I'll get to that. Grief, when left unattended, curdles into something darker. Something corrosive that seeps into every crevice of your being. I was still navigating that abyss when my parents finally reappeared in my life. Not with compassion, not with belated remorse, but with a request so vile it stripped away the last fragments of filial respect I still clung to. It was a quiet Sunday morning when they arrived, unannounced, at my doorstep. My mother carried her usual air of superiority, the same cold hauteur she had weaponized my entire life. My father trailed behind her, eyes downcast, as though rehearsing the performance of reluctant compliance. We sat in my living room, the same room where Ethan's toys still lingered untouched, silent relics of a boy who once filled the house with laughter. My mother's gaze brushed past them, as if they were debris, not memories. She wasted no time. "Isabella," she began, her tone clipped and clinical. "You know your sister's wedding is fast approaching. There are financial arrangements that need to be made." I frowned, unsure of her meaning, but my father cleared his throat and supplied the dagger. "We believe," he said softly, "that Ethan's trust fund should go towards Sophia's wedding. It's the honorable thing to do, for the family." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. My son's trust fund. The 750,000 my late husband, and I had painstakingly secured to guarantee Ethan's future. Money meant for his education, his safety, his dreams. Rage ignited, hot and merciless, drowning out the last vestiges of grief. I stared at them, these people who had birthed me, and wondered how flesh and blood could harbor such cruelty. You refused to attend his funeral. I whispered, my voice trembling but sharp as glass. You abandoned me when I needed you most. And now, you dare stand in my home and ask me to fund a spectacle for Sophia. With Ethan's legacy. My mother's lips curved into a thin, disapproving line. Don't be dramatic, Isabella. The boy is gone. That money shouldn't rot in an account. Sophia's wedding is an event for the living. A chance for this family to restore its honor after everything. Everything. That single word struck me harder than any insult ever could. To her, my child's death was merely an inconvenience. A stain upon her curated image of familial perfection. I rose from my chair trembling, but resolute. Get out, I said. My father attempted to placate me, murmuring about unity, about sacrifice, about obligations to family. But I was past listening. My heart had become stone, carved by their betrayals. As they walked away, my mother glanced back and delivered her final barb. You'll regret this obstinacy, Isabella. One day you'll realize family is all you have. But in that moment, I knew the truth. I had no family. Not anymore. And so began the quiet stirring of something inside me. Something stronger than grief, fiercer than rage. A promise that their cruelty would not remain unanswered. The days that followed were not silent. Silence would have been merciful. Instead, they were filled with echoes. Echoes of Ethan's laughter, cut short by fate. Echoes of my parents' cold demand, their voices replaying in my mind like a poisoned refrain. At work, numbers blurred before my eyes. In the grocery store, every aisle seemed haunted by a ghost of what I had lost. But amid the grief, something else took root, sharp, deliberate, unyielding. It was no longer sorrow that drove me. It was clarity. On the third night after their visit, I sat at my kitchen table, the same place where Ethan once spilled milk and giggled at the chaos. My laptop glowed against the shadows. I pulled up the trust documents, reread every line, every clause, until the words seared themselves into my memory. That money was untouchable. It belonged to Ethan. And if Ethan was gone, then it belonged to me, his mother, his guardian, his blood. Not to Sophia, not to my mother's pride, not to a wedding dripping in flowers and champagne. But I also knew my parents. They would not relent. For them, persistence was not simply strategy, it was religion. If I refused quietly, they would escalate. Pressure, manipulation, perhaps even legal threats, cloaked in my mother's favorite disguise: family obligation. So I decided not to wait. I contacted an attorney, one unafraid of the venom that ran in my family's veins. His voice was calm, professional, but there was an undercurrent of fire when he said, "Emmons, Isabella, you don't need to worry. That fund cannot be touched without your consent. Legally, morally, it's yours to guard, and guard it you must." His words were a balm, but also a blade. They gave me protection, but also sliced away the last illusion that reconciliation was possible. The very next day, Sophia called. Her tone was honey dipped in arsenic. "Bella," she cooed, as though years of rivalry and venom had evaporated. "I wanted to talk about the wedding. It's going to be beautiful, but, you know how expensive things can get. We were thinking maybe you could help. For Ethan. For family. For Ethan." She dared to wrap her greed in his name. My pulse thundered, but my voice was ice. "No, Sophia, Ethan's trust is not your dowry. Not today. Not ever." There was a pause, then a sharp exhale. The sweetness drained from her voice, leaving behind her true venom. "You've always been selfish. Always the black mark on this family. Don't think you can stand in my way. Mother and father won't allow it." And she hung up. That night, staring out my window at the Denver skyline, I realized something with blinding clarity. They had stripped me of compassion. They had stripped me of belonging. And in doing so, they had given me something far more dangerous: freedom. If they wanted a war over Ethan's legacy, then a war they would have. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later, slipped under my door as though they couldn't bear to hand it to me directly. White vellum, embossed with gold filigree. Sophia Whitmore. Yes, she was taking her fiancé's name before even wearing the dress. Cordially invited me to her grand wedding at the Crestmore Country Club. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. And though every fiber of me wanted to burn that paper, to watch the edges curl and blacken until nothing remained, I kept it. Not out of respect. Out of strategy. I walked into Crestmore on the night of the engagement dinner. Not as a guest, but as a storm contained in silk. My dress was simple, black, deliberate. A contrast to Sophia's glimmering sequins, her diamond smile rehearsed for every camera. She wanted spectacle. I would give her one. The room hushed when I entered. Not because I was late, but because I was unexpected. My mother's eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a bloodless line. My father's glass froze midway to his lips. And Sophia, oh, Sophia. Her face flickered with irritation before snapping back into composure. You came, she said, the words carrying as if she wanted the entire room to hear. Even after everything. Yes. I replied, my voice steady, slicing through the clink of silverware. After everything. I took my seat uninvited. Gasps rippled around me, but no one stopped me. Not yet. As the courses were served, conversations strained against the silence I carried with me. I let them squirm. And when Sophia finally rose to toast her fiancé, her crystal flute glinting under the chandeliers, I stood too. To Sophia, I said, raising my glass. My voice was calm, but the weight of my words forced stillness across the room. May your marriage last longer than your decency. A ripple of laughter broke out, nervous, confused. My mother hissed my name, but I ignored her. I stepped forward, just close enough for Sophia to see the fire in my eyes. You demanded my son's trust fund. I said, loud enough for every guest to hear. Money left for a child who will never take another breath. And you wanted to dress your greed in white lace and roses. The room froze. Sophia's face drained of color, her fiancé's smile faltered. My father rose, but I cut him down with a single glare. You called me selfish. I continued, voice unwavering. But selfishness is trying to turn grief into currency. Selfishness is erasing a boy's memory for a champagne fountain. No one moved. The chandeliers seemed to tremble with the weight of the silence. Sophia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. My mother's hand tightened on her pearls. I lowered my glass, set it gently on the linen tablecloth, and turned toward the door. Enjoy your celebration, I said softly, though the words sliced sharper than steel. Because this is the only one you'll have with me in attendance. And then I left, my heels striking against marble like the echo of a verdict. Outside, the night air was cool against my burning skin. For the first time in weeks, I felt something almost foreign. Not peace, not yet, but power. The next morning, my phone rang before dawn. It wasn't a courtesy call. It was an ambush. Evelyn. My father's voice rasped through the line, brittle with anger. That display last night was shameful. You've embarrassed this family. I let the silence stretch until it became unbearable, then replied, no, father. I unmasked it. Click. The call ended. By noon, the retaliation began. A courier arrived at my door carrying a thick envelope. Legal documents, pristine and heavy with intent. Inside, a petition filed by my parents and sister, demanding that the trust fund left for Daniel, my son, my child, be reallocated to cover pressing family obligations. Obligations, in their vocabulary, meant white doves, a 12-piece orchestra, and Sophia's vanity masquerading as tradition. I read the papers once, then again. Each word was more poisonous than the last. They weren't just asking, they were erasing. My son's memory wasn't sacred to them, it was negotiable. A bargaining chip to be played and discarded. But what they hadn't counted on was me. I dialed a number I hadn't used in months. Attorney Margaret Reeves, sharp as glass, relentless as tide. She had represented me once before, during the ugliest chapters of my divorce. She answered on the second ring. Evelyn, she said. I wondered when you'd call. I need their petition buried, I told her. My voice didn't crack. It was steel wrapped in fire. Margaret laughed softly. They really think they can touch your son's trust. That money was ironclad, Evelyn. Your ex-husband may have been many things, but reckless with legacy wasn't one of them. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief. Not yet, but the first hint of vindication. Within hours, Margaret had filed a counter motion. By evening, she called again. Their request isn't just weak. It's insulting. Any judge who sees this will shred it. You're safe. Safe. The word clanged against my ribs. I didn't want safety. I wanted exposure. I wanted the world to see them for what they were. So I waited. When Sophia's wedding announcements began rolling out, gilded cards with embossed lettering, social media posts dripping in curated perfection, I made my move. One email. That's all it took. To the same journalists who once covered my husband's philanthropy, the same ones who wrote glowing features about my parents. Hold money honor. Attached were scanned copies of the petition they filed. Every page. Every signature. Proof that they tried to drain a dead boy's trust to fund a spectacle. The headline appeared 3 days later. Prominent Whitmore family seeks to seize grandson's trust for lavish wedding. The internet caught fire. Hashtags bloomed like smoke. Trust fund theft, justice for Daniel, agreed in gold. By midnight, Sophia's fiancé's family had withdrawn their support. Vendors began canceling contracts. Sponsors pulled out. And the wedding that was supposed to be their crown jewel began collapsing in real time. And I sat in my study, Daniel's photo beside me, watching the empire of illusion crumble. I didn't lift a finger. Just let the truth breathe. The wedding was cancelled within weeks. Officially, they called it a postponement due to unforeseen circumstances. Unforeseen? No. The world had simply seen too clearly. My parents stopped returning calls. Sophia's name trended online for all the wrong reasons. And the same family, that once paraded itself as untouchable, now hid behind drawn curtains and silence. But I wasn't finished. Because the truth is, revenge isn't only about destruction. It's about reclamation. About rewriting the script they once forced you to perform in. So when my company went public 6 months later, an IPO valued at $40 million, I planned a celebration. Not just any celebration. The kind of event people whispered about for years. The kind that rewrites reputations. The venue a restored Chiach 2 overlooking the sea, lit in gold and firelight. The guest list investors, allies, friends who had stood by me in the shadows. Every detail was meticulous. Deliberate. Like a symphony of vindication. And my family. They weren't invited. Their names weren't on the seating chart. Their titles weren't printed in the program. They weren't whispered about as expected arrivals. They simply didn't exist. I had erased them with the same precision they once used to erase me. At midnight, when the fireworks thundered above the Chetu, and the champagne flowed like rivers, I raised my glass. Not to them, never to them, but to Daniel, my son, my anchor, my truth. His legacy hadn't been stolen. It had been sanctified. His trust had stayed intact, untouchable, exactly as it was meant to be. And while my family cowered in their crumbling mansion, gossip tearing apart their once perfect image, I stood surrounded by everything they thought I'd never have: power, recognition, and freedom. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had carved my own. And in that moment, I understood something: true revenge isn't about screaming louder. It's about erasing the noise altogether. They had banned me from their weddings. So I banned them from my empire. And unlike them, I never looked back.